My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
If you're taking care of a senior loved one, then you know it can be hard. Remember, it's okay to ask for help. There's a reason why 29 million families have turned to Care.com. Experienced senior caregivers can help with everything from meal prep to taking your loved one to doctor's appointments. And every caregiver you hire is background checked, so important for peace of mind. Find full-time, part-time, or even occasional help that fits your family's schedule and budget. Get the support you need with Care.com.
At BlueNile.com, you can find endless ways to make your moments sparkle. From classic and timeless jewelry gifts to creating the custom engagement ring of her dreams, all at prices you won't find at a traditional jeweler. And right now, you can save up to 40% on fine jewelry and 25% on engagement ring settings during the Blue Nile Anniversary Sale, going on now. Go to BlueNile.com to shop the Blue Nile Anniversary Sale and save up to 40%. That's BlueNile.com.
Well, I did want to clock that Tyson says at one point, when people look at me and they see a monster, and I wrote down Tyson confirming that the real sea of monsters is the friends we make.
Yes.
Welcome back to Monster Donut, a literary and historical deep dive into the Percy Jackson series and all of its following spin-offs. I'm Emily, a classic scholar-ish.
And I'm Phoebe, a dramaturg and story consultant.
And today we're talking about the Sea of Monsters movie.
Yeah.
A film.
Film.
It was honestly, every time I watch it, it's getting better.
Right? Every time you watch it, it becomes a better movie. I don't know if I'm just becoming blind to its flaws. Or...
Omnipotence has blinded you, brother.
Yeah, I mean, you get too used to a thing, you stop, really thinking about everything that's wrong with it.
Yeah. I've now watched this movie 4 times in the last year, and I would like to never watch it again, actually.
Were 3 of those times in, the last 24 hours?
Yes, basically, 48 hours. We did do a live reaction to it that's up on Patreon if you want to check it out, but... so as not to gatekeep how we originally came to this movie, I remember after The Lightning Thief, I was burned, very disappointed. And then I heard this movie was coming out, and I was like, well, at least it got a sequel. Aragon didn't get a sequel. And all the press leading up to this movie was like, don't worry, guys. We're going to do it's going to be so much better. We listened to the feedback. You know what? Don't even watch that first movie. Don't even watch. The second movie, it's standalone. So I think we should analyze this movie as a standalone piece of fiction. Because that was the authorial intent.
I don't care about authorial intent. I'm going to acknowledge the fact that there was a movie before this.
That's fair, yeah. But anyway, so I went into that theater, high hopes. Very high hopes. And you know what? It met my hopes. And then it took a turn. I mean, honestly, it's not bad. And, this was, the Nathan Fillion cameo, I feel like it really absolved many sins for me, you know? Because I was at the age where it was let me point a finger and acknowledge another piece of work in my work. And I was like, yeah! You know, you're just sort of I didn't know you could do that, you know, level of excitement. Because I was, 15?
I believe we were 18.
Was it 18? When did this movie come out?
2013, I think.
You guys can't see my face right now, but I'm like, what? You know, this actually would explain it, because I don't think I wasn't as into it. You're right. The timeline doesn't check out. I didn't even watch Firefly till junior year of high school. Oh my god.
And this leads us into what I think is a massive theme of this movie, which is memory and the ways that it gets mangled by the many years since. But we'll get to that.
Oh, that's so interesting, because that ties into the massive theme I found. But we'll get to mine. I want to talk about yours first. Well, I know mine. There's the point at which I realized it, and I'm going to take you down the rabbit hole I went down. But it's not for a little bit.
Okay. I think I had a similar reaction to this movie where I really thought that just based on all of the content that was coming out before it came out with like the behind the scenes footage, and we were seeing the Princess Andromeda, we were seeing Polyphemus's cave, we were seeing Clarice, there was a promo image of Selena going around, and like in the trailers we were seeing that the plot seemed very similar for the most part to the book. And so I went into this thinking, they did it, they've solved it. There's no way they'd make a bad movie again. And I think I was on board for the most part until I think when they get to the Sea of Monsters and they don't do the Sea of Monsters part of the book.
Yeah, that might do it.
In the movie titled Sea of Monsters, I think that was when it started to take a turn for me. And I came out of that movie theater very angry and confused because so much of it had been closer to what I was looking for, but so much of it was not. But yeah, I think in the years since, each time I watch it, I get less angry at it. Mm. Like, I was able to watch it this time around and only get a little bit angry. And because we were turning it into analysis, I was able to channel that anger in a really useful way, in a really productive way.
So we begin. 7 years ago.
I want to note, before we get into the actual flashback, the opening moments of this film, because we get narration.
Yeah.
Percy starts off this movie saying, "At first I didn't believe it either, but the gods of Olympus are real." As if he's mid-conversation with you. As if you've already expressed that you don't believe this. I'm imagining it's like in the act of sitting down in a movie theater with your popcorn, ready to be entertained. He like knows that you're not about to take this seriously, which I'll come back to narration, I think, later on. This movie opens and closes with it, but I do want to note that this movie is like explicitly at the beginning, we are being told a story. Percy is telling it. He didn't tell us the first one, but now that he's immersed himself in the world and experienced the first movie, now he is prepared to tell his story. So a part of my line of thinking while watching this was like, what makes Percy want to tell the Sea of Monsters instead of the Lightning Thief to his audience?
I wonder if it's to reclaim being the main character, because we do continue that from the book, that Percy is not the main character, and he's really annoyed about it in this movie.
Right, he feels like, in this movie, he feels like he's not the hero, and so by telling his story, he's reclaiming the role of hero.
Yeah. So, and he gets to tell the story of Thalia. We can go surprisingly hard on real analysis for a little bit with this movie, which is hilarious to me. The bit is that I'm 100% serious right now. Should we talk about the fact that Luke is the one who carries Grover into camp?
Yes,
and, like,
we
Thalia does, like, the rear guard act like Sally. I just wrote down Thalia is mother. And so Luke and Percy begin the story paralleled with each other for the last one, because they're both the ones carrying Grover into camp, while someone else is giving up their life to protect him.
Yes.
That being said, the barrier is in a different place.
I know.
in this one than the last one.
But listen, this is Percy telling this story. He doesn't really know it.
He doesn't know what's going on. He doesn't remember. You're right. Proof. Unreliable narrator. Proof. Mm-hmm. So then why is Percy then, because he's telling the story, right? So everything in it, all the details then are probably stuff he's just made up, because like the real narrator, I'm going to choose to be Annabeth, because she's the only one outside the situation going on here. She's just the watcher. She's the observer. So why is Percy intentionally setting himself up as a parallel with Luke?
You know, I think that if he's telling this story at the end of this movie, I think, I think that Percy's relationship to Luke's cause and to the gods in this movie is a bit complicated. And I can see, this is kind of getting ahead of ourselves, but I can see Percy looking back on this and understanding Luke's perspective in that scene years from now. Like, if we assume that the story sort of continued the way that it did in the books, this movie sets him up so that he can go on that same journey that Percy does in, like, Heroes of Olympus.
I mean, if House of Hades had just come out, they've read some Heroes.
House of Hades hadn't come out quite yet.
Do we think the people who wrote this movie read Heroes of Olympus?
No.
There is a surprising amount of research that went into this movie, at least on the classical end.
The book end also, though, because, like, 2 seconds from now, you know, they're about to reference the bronze dragon and, like, the stolen chariot.
I know. But imagine my surprise when we open on modern day in the, like, arena at Camp Half-Blood, and I'm staring at this thing, and I'm like, this actually kind of looks like a real ancient Greek stadium, Phoebe. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's a full circle, so that's not quite right. There's no, like, usually it would be, like, kind of oblong for there was, like, a track, and, like, usually the seating wouldn't be stone necessarily, because they would just sit on a hill, but, like, those entrances and stuff look like ancient Greek stadiums. And further, it looks Greek, not Roman, because the Romans, the walls on the bottom would have been raised. The seating would have started a little bit higher up, so there was room for gladiatorial combat. It's curious that it doesn't look that Roman to me. I'm going to come back to that.
Okay.
This relates to my wild theory. I have a wild theory, but I got to build up to it.
Yes. We can't just start with that.
No.
I'm double checking my notes for Clarice's first line.
First lines.
I believe it's, "How nice of you to show up just to watch me win."
That feels
is
right.
The line that I wrote down. Not a bad first line for Clarice. Displays some cockiness, confidence.
I feel like in the same way a lot of people joke about Annabeth in the first movie being actually Clarice, I feel like Clarice in this movie was actually Annabeth. I actually started to make a list and then stopped myself because I was like, no, I can't do this. I started to make a list of, like, everything Annabeth does in this movie because...
Very little.
Very little, and none of it's all bad. Like, none of it's smart. Like, the only thing she does that's, like, she's like, Goddess of Wisdom, remember? It was following the instructions accurately.
Yeah.
Actually, poorly. Poorly! With the win. Okay, I'm gonna get to myself. Also, my love... The person that does the set dressing that with accurate Greek appears to be back because the wall behind Mr. D, it says, like, theater. It's all real Greek. Almost all of the props in this movie have real Greek on them with one exception. But, like, it's real Greek. Sometimes it doesn't say what it's supposed to say, but it is Greek.
So, Percy and Clarice are facing off in this, I don't know what you call it, obstacle course.
Yeah, obstacle course. It's sort of like the way Capture the Flag worked in the first movie, right? Where it doesn't actually matter that it's supposed to be a team sport. It's just like you beat someone up and then you go to the top.
Percy loses because he stops to help someone who fell off.
And we were debating if Book Percy would do that.
Yeah.
Because that guy didn't look like he was actually in danger. It just looked like he was getting dragged around by his ankle. Like, I feel like Book Percy would be like, oh, man, and then keep going.
Compared to the danger that the other campers get into while, like, doing the chariot race, and Percy continues because he would like to win, especially because he's in this place where he feels like he's not good enough and, like, he needs to prove himself. That this doesn't seem like enough danger to stop Book Percy. I think Book Percy would have noted that, like I said in our Patreon episode on this, that he would have looked back and been like, an Apollo camper fell off and was dragged behind the thing for...
This Percy's... I don't know, what's he going through? He's going through some stuff.
This Percy chooses to help this kid. I think what I've decided is that, like, he's more focused on I need to be a hero, but I think Book Percy is focused on proving himself less as a hero and more as, like...
the main character.
Yeah.
Like, heroism in terms of kleos and deeds, not heroism in terms of, like, compassion.
Sort of,
Old school hero versus now, you know? Batman versus Superman, if you will.
Sure. I think it's framed by, you know, you start off with Thalia doing this ideal hero move in, like, a modern American sense, and that she sacrifices herself for her friends' safety.
Yeah, America loves a rear guard.
And, like, leaves a real tangible impact on the world. You know, she creates this barrier. She's protecting everyone from now on. And Percy saying that this act of bravery inspires him. that to me says that like this version of Percy is really focused on being like that kind of hero and like knowing that he is good and that he is continuing to do good and like leave a positive impact where he goes. So that is why Percy stops to help this kid. He is trying to prove his own heroism. The game hardly matters to him, while Book Percy, the game does matter.
So Clarice wins.
Yes.
And it's taunting Percy. And we find out that apparently Percy's been in a slump where he and Clarice have been in the same, like, quests and situations together. And, like, Annabeth and Grover keep trying to remind him of heroic things he's done recently. But he keeps being like, nope, that wasn't me, that was Clarice. The first one, of course, being the stolen chariot. Ares' chariot. And I want to come back to that, but I'll just quickly list them off. They also mentioned, like, the fall tournament, the solstice games. So I'm like, okay, do they have games on the winter solstice? So has he been here, like, the whole time? Year-round? And then they say the Bronze Dragon quest also. But the one that actually really stuck out to me was the Stolen Chariot, because as we know, that is a short story of Percy and Clarice. Yep. And I came up with a theory, because obviously Clarice wasn't in the first movie, which must mean that she was not yet at camp. So I'm wondering if Percy ran into Clarice in New York City and they met, and the Stolen Chariot is how Clarice, like, got involved in this whole world and came to camp.
I had the same thought, that he looked out his window in class and saw a girl fighting some birds, right?
Yeah, they were the Stymphalian birds. It might have been a different kind of bird. It's been a minute.
Yeah, I think it's a different one. I don't know. But I had the same thought, but I figured it probably ends differently because they don't know each other. And also, I don't think Percy is lying when he says that it was Clarice who did all of that. You know, like, if Book Percy said, oh, that was all Clarice, we know that he's sort of giving her the credit when, like, he helped, while this Percy, I don't think, is doing that.
I have a question for you. When do you think Poseidon stopped talking to Percy in his head?
I think that Percy hasn't heard Poseidon since their conversation on Olympus.
That's sort of what I thought, too, because I was like, when else would it have been? Because the thing is, right, like, there's no Poseidon voice in his head this whole movie. And he's very clearly been trying to reach out to Poseidon this whole time to get him to talk to him and try to get him to talk to him again, and it's just, like, not working. So it's, like, clearly stopped with no explanation at some point. And it's, like, serves to make Percy feel even more like he's kind of been passed over. Like, he had his chance, he had his glory, and he's a one-hit wonder. Because, you know, saving the world, right? Like, you gotta keep topping yourself. You can't just save the world one time. That's not enough fulfillment for your whole life as a hero. Most Half-Bloods save the world at least 4 times in their career.
And all 1 year after the other.
1 year after the other.
But, yeah, in the Olympus scene from the last movie, Poseidon explicitly says that he's going to be there for Percy in his thoughts and in his dreams.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, we get some contact from Poseidon to Tyson. Yeah. But I think the only time that we see him reach out to Percy is there's that ripple after Percy says this prayer.
It is a good point, though. There's very interesting ambiguity. This movie never answers the question of has Poseidon moved on from Percy?
Yeah. The way the gods are treated in this movie, they are so much more distant and untouchable, I think, because they just never show up. Like, I feel like they seem less, maybe, overwhelming or powerful, but because they're there so much, they feel present constantly, and so their absence is like, it's just very empty.
In this one, you know what's interesting is Mr. D is very different in this too, and I think that contributes to it, because Mr. D never feels scary in this movie. Like, he never flexes power. He acts like a camp director. I made a note later on, when, like, Thalia's trees first poisoned, he's like, oh man, they're gonna overrun camp. This is a problem. And I was like, Book Mr. D would never. Book Mr. D would be like, oh man, you're all gonna die. That sucks.
It's him, and then it's Hermes, who also, you know, even though he shows off a couple powers here and there, he is also much more grounded. Like, Lin-Manuel Miranda was scarier than this guy.
No. It was so interesting as well because I felt like Mr. D, Chiron, and Hermes all had genuinely good moments, like good lines that were delivered well, that were like about parenthood in a way that made it seem like they were just doing their best. But the thing is, it's like, if it's just that in your movie without the contrasting point of what the gods are usually like, it doesn't work.
What do you mean? This is a perfect film.
It doesn't work the same way. Like, you're not all of a sudden seeing behind the facade. You're like, that there is no facade. This is just the way they are. They're just parents doing their best.
But you have all of that around Percy, and then Percy constantly reaching out to someone who said he would be there, and he gets nothing. And then, like, you get Hermes saying all of these lines about parenthood, immediately followed by Luke saying, and he couldn't say any of that to my face.
That was a good moment. But what bothered me was that Percy didn't think about himself. He didn't think about himself, and he didn't introspect at all. No, he didn't. I never thought once in this movie that Percy was going to change teams, and
Should I get into this?
No, let's keep going. Let's wait till we get to the boat.
Okay, I'll wait for the boat. We get the Tyson introduction.
Yeah. So this is interesting. In the book, right, Annabeth has to let him in because he's a Cyclops, which is technically a monster. In this movie, he just walks right in. And they're like, how did he get in? That shouldn't be possible. And, like, Tyson's arc in this movie is like, I'm more demigod than monster. Which is so interesting to me. The rules, why am I analyzing this like this is real? It feels so stupid. And I guess also when we get to the demi-titan thing later, it seems like being a demigod is more about self-identification than world building.
Yeah, this was something I was thinking a lot about because in in Percy's first lines, he says that there were 4 half-bloods coming to camp and only 3 made it out, which means that he's counting Grover as a half-blood. And I was also, by the end of the movie, wondering whether Tyson could have counted as, like, a contender for Great Prophecy Kid. Which the movie tries to say no.
When does it say no, though? I don't think it says no.
I double-checked. It only says no once, but it's, they get onto the Princess Andromeda. Tyson says that he's a son of Poseidon. And Luke says that's impossible. There are no other half-blood children of Poseidon. And Tyson says, well, I'm a Cyclops. Implying that those are 2 separate things. But I feel like the rest of the movie is saying to me that he has Poseidon's blood. Like, that's how he got into camp, is because he's basically a half-blood. I mean, you could argue by the end of this movie that Tyson is the one who's fulfilling a part of the prophecy, and it's not Percy.
Okay, I want to hear this. Oh, I'm excited to get... Okay, let's keep going.
Okay. So Tyson is introduced. He walks in knowing that his father is Poseidon. He meets Percy, and then we get the bull.
So the Colchis bull appears, breaks through the barrier, which shouldn't be possible, and proceeds to fucking wreck everybody. Percy finally defeats it, and Luke shows up in like an almost dreamlike state. Like, is he really there? And what he says is so interesting to me, because he goes, damn it, Jackson, do you know how hard Colchis bulls are to come by? And so I'm sitting there like, wait a minute, did he expect to walk out of there with this bull? Because the first few times, every other time I've watched this movie, this is what I assumed happened, because I'd read the books. All right, I assumed, in the logic of this movie, the bull was supposed to distract everybody while Luke poisoned the tree. But then I thought about it, and I was like, no, the bull couldn't get in until after Luke poisoned the tree.
Yes.
And he seems annoyed that the bull is killed. So Luke had to get into camp for a different reason. And I have no idea what that reason is.
My theory is that he poisoned the tree to weaken the barrier so that he could let this bull in to cause a scene, to distract everyone, so that he could go kidnap Grover. That's my theory, and that it didn't work exactly. You know, Percy saved the day too quickly, he didn't get the chance, and so he kidnaps him later on in the quest.
But then why does Luke, like, he could have just, he's got a teleportation circle, right?
Yes.
I love those things, by the way. That's so funny.
So why not just kidnap Grover using the teleportation circle? It can't teleport inside camp until the barrier is weakened.
I see.
And you can't get into camp.
And you
because
can't
you are
get
now a demi-titan.
Yeah, he could definitely still get into camp, unless demi-titans can't get in. Oh.
Yeah. Maybe this is, I mean, Sea of Monsters, we've got people walking the line between monster and human. Maybe the things Luke's done. You know, he crawled through Tartarus, we heard.
Oh.
Basically, which almost made Percy into a monster, so...
But Chris Rodriguez was there the whole time, also.
Chris Rodriguez could have stolen
What?
stolen any satyr at any point in time.
No, I think Luke was after something else. That's what I'm saying. What was he after? What if it was the teleportation charm?
Oh, okay.
What if it was in the attic?
That could make sense. We could say that. But still, it's like you are the son of the god of thieves. Simply walk in and steal it.
Yeah, it's gotta have been something bigger than that.
Like a satyr.
Maybe we'll figure it out later. Tyson saves Clarice, gets what appears to be barbecued, and in an honestly kind of cool moment. Like, this bullfight, not bad. And then ultimately Percy is the one that defeats the bull. But no one seems to care. So again, I think he's turning into an NPC before our eyes, and he's clawing his way back into that story.
I mean, this was his an act of heroism for him, but no one was able to witness it. Yeah.
No one cared.
Like, the last Clarice saw of him, he was losing that fight. Then Luke appears, and Luke kind of gives his speech here instead of in The Lightning Thief. He says, Chiron, Mr. D, all the rest, they don't care about us. To them, we're just kids, a bunch of pawns meant to be pushed around, told what to do. I'm not the only half-blood who thinks so. Then he says, think about it, and he leaves.
And does Percy think about it? No.
Maybe.
And they find out that Luke has poisoned Thalia's tree. Annabeth then is trying to figure out a way to save the tree and save Thalia.
And Grover mentions Persephone. I didn't notice it the first time, but he says that Persephone did come up with Miracle Grow. Maybe we could try that to heal Thalia's tree. And I take this as confirmation that the affair is continuing.
Oh, okay.
But Annabeth, while looking for an answer, comes up with the Golden Fleece.
And inadvertently reveals the true secret of this movie. Because the last few times I have watched this movie, I was looking at that when she's flicking through those scans of papyri on her tablet. I looked at it, and it looked like somebody had drawn chicken scratch, like with some Greek letters in it. And I was like, oh, somebody just wanted to make something up that looked kind of like an ancient language, that looked maybe kind of like Greek, but they didn't want to actually do any filler text, so they didn't do that. And there's like some random pictures on there. I thought, oh, this must have been a different prop person, not my girl. This isn't the person I love. This is somebody else. They just knocked something together. But then the twist of the century happened, Phoebe. Because I paused it just to look at it. And I'm looking at these symbols, and I'm like, wait a minute, these look familiar. This is fucking Phoenician! And not only is it Phoenician, okay, that first slide is Phoenician on a papyrus with photographs of the Parthenon. Now, we're going to ignore the fact that they're photographs, okay, on scans of ancient papyri. Whatever, we don't care. Let's just pretend it's a drawing of the Parthenon. It's the Parthenon, and then it's the Kerameikos, which is another building on the Acropolis. Let me take you down the rabbit hole with me, okay? The Parthenon was constructed in 400 BC, hereabouts, around 400 BC. It's actually like 425 or something. I don't remember. I had to know it at some point. I don't know it anymore. 4 something BC, okay, in Athens. Now, the significance of Phoenician, for those who aren't aware, is that the Phoenician alphabet is actually the alphabet that the Greek alphabet is based on. The Phoenicians were a Mediterranean peoples that were notorious for being the best at sailing and seafaring around like Bronze Age-ish. And the Greek alphabet, our first instance is what we consider to be the modern Greek alphabet that developed from the Phoenician alphabet, was in 8th or 9th century BC. So that's like a good 400-ish years pre-Parthenon. Okay, that's when the Greek alphabet first emerges. Which means that if there are documents with Phoenician and the Parthenon that are presumably ancient, this means the dates are different. This means that we do not yet have the Greek alphabet at the construction of the Parthenon. I was thinking about it, and I was like, how could this be? And the only conclusion I came to was that this movie exists in an alternate timeline where the Bronze Age collapse never happened. We're in an alternate universe, Phoebe. It was in front of us the whole time. And this also explains why Clarice's ship is so much more advanced than it should be for a Civil War ship. The Phoenicians, they're seafaring. If the Bronze Age collapse never happens, we never lost the technology.
Okay.
This makes so much sense. This makes hilariously a lot of sense for so much of this movie. This also could explain why Poseidon seems to be like a way bigger deal. Like, he's the one that kills Kronos. In what universe? That was Zeus. Why is the Camp Half-Blood sigil a trident, Phoebe? Like, what if in the Percy Jackson universe, right, like, the Bronze Age collapse was caused by Kronos in some way, and in this universe, it's like they stopped him before. Because they also keep saying that all of this is 3,000 years old.
Yes.
3,000 years ago, if you do the math, is 1,000 BC, there approximately. This means that the Greek gods did not come to be or exist. It shifts the timeline up, is what I'm saying. Like, the Phoenicians were just in power for way longer than they would have been. Like, because this bumps up the timeline by like a couple thousand years, basically. Also, important note, the writing on Riptide is in ancient Greek, which means that Riptide canonically now dates to later than the Parthenon. I don't know what that means.
It means that Kronos was killed after the Parthenon was built.
By the Phoenicians.
By the Phoenicians. Because we know that sword is the one that Poseidon used to kill his father.
But this is my theory for why the Sea of Monsters is weird. I don't think the Odyssey exists in this world the way we know it. I don't think the Sea of Monsters is the same as in the other one. Because in the other one, the Sea of Monsters would have been created while the ancient Greeks were kind of bumming around the Mediterranean and taking power. And in this version, the Sea of Monsters was created either way later or during the Phoenician rule. So it's different and works differently. It was made by different gods. It's an alternate universe. And you know what's bananas too is Phoenician is written right to left. And I was looking at these documents and they're clearly written right to left. Somebody did research, Phoebe. This is so intentional. Except for the photographs part. Like that. But maybe they had cameras. I don't know.
I mean, the Phoenicians, who knows what they were up to when they had all that extra time.
Oh my god.
I think an important part of this is that we know that the Disney parks exist in this universe because they sing It's a Small World. And there is a portion of Spaceship Earth where they talk about the Phoenicians. And I am curious about what Spaceship Earth is like now, actually.
There's so many implications. I did not yet have time to see if it spells out anything in the Phoenician alphabet because I'm not that insane. But this whole time it was staring at me in the face, Phoebe. No Bronze Age collapse. Does this mean the Greeks are the sea peoples?
Okay. We'll keep that in mind as we continue.
Oh, and Luke mentions a prophecy.
Yes, Luke mentions a prophecy when he shows up, which spurs Percy to go ask Chiron about the prophecy. And Chiron actually allows him to hear it. It's the Sea of Monsters, and he sends him up there to actually hear the prophecy.
We also get a book Chiron line too, right? Where it's if you're still sane when you come back down or something. And also the oracle's so helpful. She's no, you don't know the full backstory.
She actually has a whole conversation with him, tells him everything that he needs to know.
There's some gorgeous animation. Truly gorgeous animation.
I love it. I actually really love the way that this prophecy is delivered. The stained glass is really cool. And we already talked plenty about stained glass in the Big House during the TV show. But here it's even more. I mean, her window is entirely stained glass. And through animated stained glass, she explains the story of Kronos, which in this version, he was defeated by his 3 eldest sons. She says Kronos is destined to rise again.
In 18 years, precisely, the planets will align.
Yes. And she explains that all of this is going to begin when 2 cousins grapple for the fleas, the son of the sea god and the lightning thief. And then goes on to say the great prophecy, but with keywords changed.
Changed?
I didn't write it down, the way that she says it, but I'm sure I can list, like, one of the major ones is the evil soul cursed blade shall reap instead of the hero's soul.
Here's my question.
Yes.
Why? To unkill the author, to dig up the author from its shallow grave for a minute. What? Why?
It must be that they wanted to simplify things for this movie. Like, they wanted to fit this whole prophecy into this movie, and they couldn't deal with the hero ambiguity with all the things they wanted to do.
But it's like they made the ending a question mark, you know?
That confuses me so much. Like, why? I have a theory about this, but why sabotage your entire movie in the last 30 minutes? It's crazy. Like, you were doing fine. I had complaints, but, like, if this had continued to just be the Sea of Monsters instead of all 5 books at once...
Maybe the writers were like, I don't want to do this again.
I have a reason for this. Like, I have a story reason for this. I was looking at, because one of the big things that I talked about back when this movie first came out, that was, like, one of my main complaints, was that it did all 5 books at once. Or all 4 Falling books. There's not so much Lightning Thief in this. There's some.
Like a little Lightning Thief, though. Like, there's a non-zero amount of Lightning Thief, you know?
But the more explicit ones are like, we're doing Sea of Monsters, obviously, but we're also doing the Titan's Curse because Dr. Thorne is here. We're stopping in DC. Annabeth is, like, killed or taken by the Manticore.
Yeah.
We're doing Battle of the Labyrinth, obviously, because Kronos returns and, you know, seemingly destroys Luke in the process.
Ethan.
We open the coffin. Ethan's there. We're doing The Last Olympian because the prophecy, obviously. And so I really think it's because it all comes back to the fact that Percy is narrating this, because where the first movie we said was a retelling by others. I think because the Sea of Monsters is explicitly a story being told by Percy, his memory of it all is clearly a little bit jumbled. And so I think that this movie is Percy attempting to retell. This is him trying to tell his story.
I see. And my question is, who's telling him to, you know, pick it up, make it shorter, cut the corners?
I mean, I picture this as, like, it's years from now. He's like, it's decades later, and he's looking back on it. And we already know, we discussed in The Sun and the Star that Percy's memory is not the best of the things that have happened to him due to trauma. And so I think that this movie, because it opens and ends on Percy explicitly narrating it, it is Percy attempting to tell his story, but so much of his memory of what happened to him is lost or is mixing with other elements of his own story that it's completely unreliable at this point. Like, maybe it's because I just finished the second season of Interview with the Vampire the other night, but I just think this is a story about how memory is flawed, and attempting to recall something, you're going to color the events differently each time that you try to do it. Like, you know, we talked plenty about memory as a core part of the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles. And so I was thinking about this not just in terms of, like, Percy attempting to tell this story. I was also thinking, like, Percy attempting to tell Thalia's story, which he's heard from Grover and Annabeth, and, like, Annabeth relying on what her memories of what the Cyclops was like as, like, a way to justify the way that she treats Tyson, and Luke relying on, like, what he knows of Kronos, and then learns the hard way that what he knows of Kronos is flawed, because, like, that memory of who Kronos is flawed in his head. And so I think that is a core part of this movie, the fact that in retelling a story, you're going to get it wrong. Like, we know this isn't exactly how things went.
It explains why Poseidon's a lot more important in the Kronos story. I love how canonically then in this version, Percy doesn't remember why Riptide is cursed, so he's just like, it's cursed. Does Zoe Nightshade mean nothing to you? Anyway.
It implies that Percy has forgotten so much of his own story and messed up a lot of it.
And this also makes sense for why, like, Luke's motivation and, like, things doesn't just, like, makes no sense in this movie. Because Percy's not keeping track of that. He doesn't care.
Anything that doesn't quite work, rather than it being because it's a bunch of kids trying to tell a story that they were told around the campfire, it is now because it is years in the future and Percy is telling it, or attempting to tell it, but doesn't have a handle on it like he used to when he wrote. when he dictated the original series to the Camp Half-Blood Scribe.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that Camp Half-Blood Scribe No, I don't think I think the Camp Half-Blood Scribe would be ashamed of this movie if he ever knew it existed.
I don't think he would see it, actually. I think he would purposefully avoid it.
Anyway, so Annabeth goes to Mr. D to tell him about the Golden Fleece. Mr. D pretends like he doesn't want to go along with it and then takes all the credit for the idea and sends Clarice and Ichneutae, this buff satyr.
I love this guy.
I do love this. You know, you're going to love him even more. I looked up Ichneutae. Phoebe, are you ready for this?
Good.
Speaking of misremembered, fragmented stories, let me tell you about this man. First of all, Ichneutae actually means the Searchers. It is a lost Sophocles play that was written in around the 5th century BC, which, again, dates around the time of the Parthenon, which also canonically means it's in Phoenician.
Yep.
But basically, there's a bunch of classical works that we know existed because other writers quote them, but we don't have the original work. My favorite example of this is that Cicero, remember, famous Roman orator, he wrote an epic poem about himself when he was consul, aka president of Rome, that was only ever quoted by people making fun of how bad it was. And it has been tragically lost to history, y'all. And I think about this at least once a week. But this Sophocles play, I think, had 3 extant quotes of it in other works. But then they found a piece of it on a papyrus, like semi-recently, apparently. So now they have a bit more of the play. Some interesting facts about this play. It was called The Searchers because it was about the satyrs that were all sent out to recover Apollo's stolen cattle. Cattle, of course, stolen by Hermes, because it is loosely based on the story we get in the Homeric hymn to Hermes. And the only surviving fragment we have, it's about them going off to go get the cattle back, and they hear the sound of a lyre, which Hermes has just invented as part of the story. And they're scared of the lyre. They're scared of the music until, like, a nymph is like, no, don't worry about it. It's just a musical instrument. Don't be scared. And then they come back and they see hides outside the cave. And they're like, okay, I think we found the right cave. And I just couldn't help but think of the parallels to our story. It was like, oh, wow, there's a hide that's like the calling card. Oh, we've got satyrs going to recover something stolen. We've got Hermes involved. That's a crucial piece of this story. Like, somebody did fucking research. Now, my new theory. This movie is not reenacting the Odyssey, actually. It's reenacting this lost play.
Right.
It's got all the beats there, which explains why they don't do the Odyssey.
Because the Odyssey is hardly the Odyssey anymore.
Yeah, it's not even the Odyssey anymore. I mean, like, they mention the Odyssey, but they just talk about the rock that he used to trap Odysseus, which that could have happened to anybody. It's like his eye is a little, but like, we don't know how it went down. Anyway, so interesting. You mentioned stories that only exist in fragments.
Yeah.
All jumbled together that we can only put together the pieces of. Lost to memory and time. Our hero, Ichneutae. Rest in peace, King.
He dies so unceremoniously. So...
I love that Poseidon has a sword in this, despite the sheer number of times a trident is associated with him visually in the first movie.
Well, okay, we have this moment where Percy is looking at Riptide, where he says, I mean, this was your sword. And in this movie, we get confirmation that this is indeed the cursed blade. What cursed it?
Maybe patricide.
That would make sense.
Because they killed Kronos in this version, let's not forget.
Mm-hmm.
Which, I mean, long story short, I think is the reason why time doesn't exist in this movie. All those times where it's a nighttime shot and then they round a corner and it's daytime.
Yeah.
Time doesn't exist canonically. He's dead! They killed him.
Wasn't this a part of a theory that we had about something at some point?
I'm sure. What theory? When? What?
Was it like us reading Heroes of Olympus and being like, oh, time is weird in this series because Kronos is gone.
You know, it's a really good piece of work when you have to come up with an analytical theory for why time doesn't work the way it should. So, Percy, Grover, and Annabeth all decide that despite the fact that Clarice and Ichneutae have already gone off, they're, of course, in a direct parallel to the first movie, might I add. They are all going to go off on this quest anyway. And they're wondering where to go. And Tyson joins up with them, and he says, I'm coming with you because the fleece is in Circeland, guarded by Polyphemus. So let's backtrack for a second. Tyson knows has known where the fleece is this whole time. He knows it's in Circeland. Clearly, as we find out later, Circeland was open to demigods as an amusement park. Which leads me to believe that demigods and people at Camp Half-Blood should know where Circeland is. No, and Tyson knows the fleece is in Circeland and guarded by Polyphemus. Which means that Tyson knows exactly where they're supposed to be going the whole time, but no one takes him seriously enough to actually use him for information. This is actually a story about disregarding people that you dehumanize.
Yeah. I mean, yeah.
One more line I want to talk about before they get in the Grey Sisters cab also is Annabeth sprays portable mist on Tyson. Now, if Percy's the one telling this story, Mr. Unreliable Narrator, and he says Tyson, quote, looks a bit like Dad, what does this mean? Like, Percy telling us this story makes a point to observe that Tyson looks a lot like Poseidon.
I think because at this point in the story, he is afraid that Tyson was sent basically to replace him. Mm. Since, I mean, Clarice makes that kind of comment. And, like, later on in the movie, we'll see he knows that Poseidon answered some of Tyson's prayers. He sees Poseidon answer one of Tyson's prayers when he hasn't gotten any answer himself. Yeah. And so the place he's in this movie is, like, he is associating Tyson with Poseidon. So that's likely part of it.
Yeah.
So Annabeth summons the Chariot of Damnation.
I didn't hate it.
Ganymede is there.
The Ganymede ad.
They pick and choose such random stuff to keep in this movie.
They're like, Ganymede in the cab. Gotcha.
Right. They were like, we have to keep, I mean, this is a necessary moment. The sirens?
Scylla. No. You get one of two, Charybdis or Scylla. Pick one.
But when the Grey Sisters overhear Annabeth saying that they don't think that they have enough money for this, they immediately stop the cab.
Which is very smart of Annabeth to do.
Yes. She is so wise, really. They stop the cab, kick them out in Washington, D.C.
Tyson comments that it looks like Olympus, which is...
Yes. To which Grover says, right down to the dudes with power who only care about themselves, which, I want to note, echoes what Luke said earlier about Chiron, Mr. D, all the rest, they don't care about us. Just want to point out that line of thinking is continuing within our hero's quest. And then they head to Not Monster Donut, Siren Coffee.
And they also drink nectar, which I guess is, like, kind of mind-altering. So there's...
Yeah, so the way that I've explained this is that this is the siren scene. Even though the siren scene doesn't happen, this is still the siren scene. But it's not happening to Annabeth. It's happening to Grover. Because Grover says about the nectar, if you haven't had, you haven't lived. And it's talking about drinking nectar as if it isn't, you know, it's dangerous for them to drink. It can kill them, but still they go for it. And it just sounds a lot like to hear the sirens is such a valuable experience. It's worth the risk. If you haven't heard them, you haven't lived. So Grover goes for it. He drinks the nectar and then immediately is grabbed while still talking about it. He's talking to Annabeth about it. Annabeth says, "It's too sweet, don't you think?" And he says, "Nectar is never too sweet." And he's grabbed, and what's left behind of him is his crutch and a pool of water. So it's sort of like if the siren scene went very wrong. If the temptation was too great and no one was able to stop Annabeth from going into the rocks, Grover swam into the rocks, drank the nectar, and is lost.
Interesting. Because I had a thought later that I felt like in the cave scene, he's like kind of actually Odysseus.
I had the same thought at one point. I was like, I think Grover is taking over once again. He's not fully the hero in this one, but he does play Odysseus a couple of times. And I was also like, you could read this and also say that it's combining the Circe scene with the siren scene because he's drinking the nectar and falling for the temptation. But I mean, obviously Circe Land is supposed to be Circe, so... So Grover is taken.
By Chris Rodriguez.
But they know that, like, Luke is behind this. And so they're like, we need to find Luke. Annabeth figures out that if they want to find Luke, they have to go talk to his dad, who is here.
Something I thought was very interesting about Hermes in this is that he transitions into a pinstripe suit when they enter his warehouse. And I was like, that's Zeus's look. What you doing, bud?
So if Percy is telling this story, he's kind of conflating Hermes and Zeus.
Yeah.
Two villains within Luke's life, two people who brought his downfall in a way. What I'm more concerned with in this scene is that Hermes says, I've tried reaching out, but the kid's angry, he's resentful, and he holds a grudge like nobody's business, just like his mother, come to think of it.
Wild line.
What happened? What happened to the Castellans? Because we know from last movie that Luke has never met his father. So Hermes has tried to reach out. I don't imagine that it happened between the Lightning Thief and this because of Luke saying, like, he didn't come to say any of this to my face. But if he tried to reach out before the Lightning Thief, it wasn't in person. Maybe through the voice in his head. But maybe that voice has gotten jumbled up with hearing Kronos in his head. And what happened with May?
And how did the Bronze Age collapse not happening in this universe impact them?
A lot of questions happening here.
There aren't any Herms. Herms don't exist. She has no protection in her yard. There's something there.
So Luke... I don't know. I don't know about this one. I was about to say, so Luke didn't grow up with a symbol of Hermes surrounding him all through his life. But then I'm like, I feel like having that symbol there and not having your father reach out to you gives you a clear, like, person to blame. Yeah. But, I mean, if she were resentful after, like... I feel like we assume that after the whole incident, she had lost herself so much that she didn't have any, like, moments of clarity. But maybe she had more clarity than we thought that she did, and she was resentful, and so she didn't put up those symbols of Hermes and told her son about Hermes from that perspective, instead of from your father was a good man perspective, like most of the parents do. I'm trying to figure out why Hermes would say this about her.
Because Percy Jackson doesn't understand how adults can have complex relationships when he's telling this story. Like, he resents Hermes for what he did to May, so he assumes May resents Hermes. This all comes back to unreliable narrator Percy Jackson.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Unfortunately, it does not come back to the Bronze Age collapse. It's gotta be one or the other for everything in this movie.
Right.
Okay. Also love that it's the Andromeda, not the Princess Andromeda. They're trying to make it more Mask.
Yeah. They didn't want Luke going around on a ship called the
Princess
Andromeda.
That being said, I stand by the fact that is still a wild choice of a name of a ship.
It really is.
I'm going to put that on our list of questions to ask Rick Riordan if we ever get him on the pod, actually. Why'd you call it the Princess Andromeda?
So we head to the Princess Andromeda. Tyson summons Rainbow, and they climb aboard as night very quickly falls.
Yeah.
And we get a first line for Ethan and Selena. I didn't write down Chris's first line earlier in the movie, but I think it was something like, no, I'm good, after they ask him if he's coming.
Oh, yeah.
It's something waving them off. Ethan's first line is, so Chris to Ethan says, did you see it? And Ethan says, no, man, did he show it to you? They're obviously talking about the coffin, which is confirmed by Selena's first line, which is, took him long enough to find it.
I had a moment when I was rewatching it where I paid closer attention to that dialogue, and I was like, oh, I wonder if they're talking about what he stole from Camp Half-Blood. And then I realized they were talking about the coffin and was like, are they bitching about how long it took Luke to go to Tartarus? And drag that huge thing out, that full fucking Roman Pope-size casket?
Yeah, but it also confirms that at least Selena's been there since before the casket was found. In my head, it's not that long ago. I don't know how long he was going through Tartarus for. Last time we said that he was maybe going through Tartarus since falling into the ocean. But these lines confirm that Selena at least has been there for a very long time with Luke. And also Ethan is being left out of the loop. These are like Ethan's only lines in this movie. And it's just him being like, wait, he showed it to you and not me?
He hasn't pledged his loyalty yet. Mm-hmm. So Grover's not on the ship, and they confront Luke.
And Luke pretends he doesn't know Grover, which is funny of him.
I wrote that down too. I was just like, what?
Oh, the satyr, right, that guy. I was like,
the guy I carried into Camp Half-Blood when my friend died. That guy. Right. Who cares? Who's that guy?
It's that purposeful rewriting that Luke does of his own relationships with these people. Like we talked about when we read The Sea of Monsters. It's actually like really a faithful adaptation.
Yeah. I also wrote down he has a very strange relationship with Thalia in this movie. Because like one minute he's like, Annabeth, how could you? Like, you know exactly what Thalia would have thought of a Cyclops. And then the next moment he's like, yeah, I killed her. It's very strange. Because like in the book, we had a whole conversation about what we think his ulterior motives might have been with Thalia and the tree. But like, they're not here. None of that's here. It's just cold-blooded.
I think there's less of a, like, in the book, it feels like, you know, just before Thalia died, she was turned into a tree, so that's still Thalia in a way. But in this, it's very clear that she died and then was turned into a tree.
Yes, maybe I just think of it as killing her.
It's not so much killing her because she died.
Yeah, I did make a note of that I was going to bring up at the end, actually. This fleece does not heal people.
It fully brings people back to life.
It resurrects people. It waits for you to die, actually, and then resurrects you. This is a resurrection. Anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself. He did go through Tartarus, Phoebe, which means Luke has officially, as we just concluded from The Sun and the Star, he's gone through it with PTSD.
Right, he has handled his PTSD.
So maybe he, like, has lost some memories. Maybe, I don't know, maybe that's what's going on. Maybe he keeps rewriting his own experience in his head every time he remembers something.
I mean, that was a big thing that we talked about in The Sea of Monsters, about how Luke remembers Thalia and how Annabeth remembers Thalia, and how both of them, like, they each have different views of what she would want and what she would think. And you, like Percy, don't know exactly which one is more accurate to who Thalia actually was. So that exists here. I also think it's worth noting, when he's talking to Annabeth, Luke says, "You disappoint me the most." Which, the word disappointment was interesting, just because Luke is feeling disappointment in his friends, that they aren't hearing him the way that he wants them to. You know, he says, Hermes couldn't tell me himself. Does that sound familiar? And then later on in the morning, he says, "Join me, Percy. It's what you were meant to do. You can't escape that prophecy. Let's show both of our fathers." He is sort of like trying to bring Percy along, and he's just not hearing him. So disappointment, just keyword that's what Luke is feeling most right now. So they're sent to the brig. I love that joke. I love the fact that there's a brig after Annabeth was like, a yacht wouldn't have a brig.
And then Percy finally fucking remembers he has water powers.
Yeah.
Which is also a great scene. Honestly, not a bad scene. Not a bad scene. I shouldn't say great scene. Not a bad scene. Then they get the tape gun out. And the first and only time they use that tape gun in this movie is to do... And it's not like they run out.
Yeah. It has always bothered me. Since the first time I saw this movie, it has bothered me every single time that I watch this, that Percy makes that big rectangle too high up. Like, he puts the bottom of it so high up that he has to do this huge step to get out of the cage that he's in. And I'm like, just put it lower.
See, what bothered me was the fact that they could have snuck into the finding a lifeboat. You know what they could have done, right? They could have just made a hole in the ship.
Yes.
And then gone to the lifeboat and gotten the only lifeboat.
There are many things they could do with this thing.
They could have used it on Charybdis to escape.
Yes, instead of lasering a hole in there.
And it's a matter eliminator. They could use that thing on anything. They really got, like, a primo magic item. But you know what, honestly, though, this is realistic to D&D. is getting an insanely cool magic item and then fucking forgetting you have it.
Is this movie secretly a campaign? Anyway, Percy escapes in the funniest way instead. Percy walks on Luke's roof.
Yeah.
They stand on water and surf around for a little bit.
My favorite part also is the fact that they make somebody else jump on the wake and fall immediately through just to tell us that Luke is special. He's got water powers.
He's different.
I had this thought, actually, and I wonder if it works. I don't think it does, but I had a moment where I was like, actually, can we still preserve the ambiguity of the eventual prophecy? And I realized, like, maybe we can, actually, with a couple surprise reveals that are definitely not in the books. Because, like, it all begins when, like, two half-bloods struggle over a golden fleece, the lightning thief and the son of the sea god. And I had a moment where I was like, is the movie low-key setting up that Luke might actually be a child of Poseidon? Because he's got water powers, and he has mysteriously survived a lot of water stuff. And I was wondering, like, oh, and it's actually the two halves of Luke grappling over the fleece, like whether to put it on Kronos or not. Like, maybe that's what they're going for. Too bad they didn't make 3 more of these, so we never found out.
Yep. And, like, you could call Percy the lightning thief in the first movie because...
Oh, so it's like a switcheroo. So it's like, oh, they're two... Oh! Interesting. We need to talk about the fact that now Percy's the one that gave Luke his scar.
Yes, it's something. The idea that, like, that encounter with Percy becomes the, like, tragic part of his backstory that spurs him forward, especially if he didn't have any contact with Kronos until after that. Because we know that Kronos came in after his quest, and so now it's like that whole situation in The Lightning Thief then becomes his tragic backstory that makes him listen to Kronos when Kronos comes to him before this movie.
So maybe Percy is right. Maybe he is the reason.
But they escape from Luke. They float out toward the Sea of Monsters.
The separation of Scylla and Charybdis, Phoebe, means something, doesn't it?
I think it's symbolic of the way that Annabeth and Clarice were once one woman turned into two.
No, you're onto something. Keep going.
In the Sea of Monsters, the book, the scene with Charybdis and Scylla is kind of a tragic moment. It is a tragic moment. Tyson is killed. The boat is destroyed. Clarice, we don't know what happens to her. We assume maybe she's dead. And we're left with just Annabeth and Percy. This moment in the movie is more of a heroic moment. You know, they defeat Charybdis and they move on. So, you know, Annabeth and Clarice are both characters who are often throughout this movie failing at what they're trying to do. Clarice ends up getting eaten by a big monster. Annabeth ruins everything that she touches, and only makes mistakes. And they only succeed when they are in the same place and they are part of the same entity. Like, without the Clarice part of her brain, Annabeth's intelligence has waned, and she's making more impulsive decisions. She's less strategy oriented. And without the Annabeth part of her brain, Clarice is kind of doing the same. And so it's only once they are together that they're able to truly achieve their goals in the way that maybe Scylla and Charybdis would have been more successful here if they were together. So it's about these two pieces of the same woman trying to come back together in the end, because that's the only way they can succeed.
All right. Yeah, which is why when they're together, crazy things happen. Like, a ship that's not a submarine becomes a submarine. There's a modern gun on a...
Possible thanks to the Phoenicians.
Carthaginians. Oh, that's why I was like, the Roman Empire doesn't exist in this one. Because in this version, the Phoenicians are too powerful. Rome never defeats Carthage. This is why it all made sense to me.
Okay. I'm also going to note a line here after they defeat Charybdis and they escape, and they're celebrating. Earlier in the movie, Tyson said to Percy, "Don't worry, camp will be okay. You gotta have faith, right?" And then in this scene, Percy says to Tyson, "Gotta have faith, right?" But when Tyson says it, it feels like he's talking about their father. When Percy says it, he says it twice in this movie. Once here, and then once at the end when he's talking to Annabeth, he says, "We make our own destinies, right? I have faith in you." Percy's faith only applies to his own abilities and his friends. I don't get any kind of vibe that Percy has more faith in Poseidon by the end of this movie. It feels like he only has more faith in Tyson, in himself.
Which was sort of track. That's the thing that puzzled me a lot about this movie, was the fact that, like, it's like the groundwork's laid, but then they just keep having Percy go, "But obviously gotta save Olympus." But it's not like lip service, like, he means it. Like, he has so many reasons to question his faith in his father, and that the gods are, like, maybe, you know, not the best thing ever, and instead, like, he doesn't even think about it.
Does he make that many comments about saving Olympus in this movie, or is it saving the world?
I guess the world.
Because they keep talking about how the world will be destroyed if Kronos comes back. And so, to me, it reads as more, you can't bring Kronos back. What's wrong with you?
I mean, and also, to be fair, like, everything we see about Kronos is what's wrong with you. Why would you want that?
It's sort of like, we haven't been given a single reason why bringing Kronos back would be a good thing, Luke. Maybe you should explain yourself further.
That's the thing. They go the vengeance route with him. Like, he keeps talking about vengeance. I'm like, for what? Percy gave you that scar.
But this is why I feel like I could see this version of Percy looking back on this and giving Luke some sympathy, because it seems that he's almost already in this movie gone on that character arc of, like, going from having faith in his father to, I don't really have any faith in my father. He hasn't spoken to me once in this entire movie, but I do have faith in my friends, and I have faith in my ability to shape my own destiny. You know, like, that whole thing that we'll probably get to, that feels like him responding to a lack of faith in his father.
So, again, despite the fact that Tyson has known this whole time we're going to Circe Land, all of a sudden we see the coordinates. And apparently in this world, in this universe, Circe opened an amusement park.
Yes.
For half-bloods. On top of Polyphemus' lair. And didn't realize that that would be a bad move business-wise.
Or did.
So I'm just saying, right? Like, you know what I mean? Like, the Odyssey happened differently.
Mm-hmm.
Where's Circe?
Eaten by Polyphemus.
She's a goddess in this version, though. So they call her the goddess Circe.
Oh, do they?
Maybe. No, that doesn't work. Never mind. I was going to say maybe the world is less misogynistic, so she's not an evil sorceress. Because the Phoenicians, I think some of them at least, were matriarchal. But then I thought about it for 5 minutes and Annabeth's characterization and was like, never mind.
But this is a movie about women, so...
So they go inside. This feels like Tunnel of Love referential. They go inside this, like, ride where they're pretty sure Polyphemus is. And they point out a boulder in there, and they're like, that's the same boulder as in the Odyssey. I think Clarice says it. That she says, see, I know stuff. And then Grover's in a wedding dress and, like, impersonating a Cyclops. But there's no Penelope parallel, right? There's no weaving. And he says he's a chambermaid. It's like, clearly there's something. This is a reference to something. But it's not a version of the Odyssey I know.
Because...
But then also Grover kind of acts as Odysseus in the scene, because in the Odyssey, the version I'm familiar with, that is not in this alternate universe, part of it, Odysseus concocts an entire plan where they basically have all this nice wine, and they get Polyphemus drunk off the wine. And so Grover, it's like, let me prepare, Grover, when he's like, oh, let me prepare you a special drink, that's exactly what Odysseus does in the Odyssey to defeat Polyphemus, the first step. So Grover is stepping into the role of Odysseus here. Then it's interesting. So Polyphemus has the fleece, like, slung over him the whole time. And his reaction to Tyson, the physicality of both of them, right? Because the Cyclops we see in the beginning and Polyphemus, they're both larger. They're all, like, CGI'd, like, larger figures. But Tyson, the only thing that's not human about him is the one eye. Which, again, I feel like is meant to lead us as viewers into the direction of, like, is he really, like, completely, like, is he more on this demigod side? And then this confrontation scene between him and Polyphemus ends with him saying, you're right, I'm not a Cyclops, I'm one of them. And then, if this is an Odyssey parallel, this is what happens in their Odyssey. They play keep away with the golden fleece. and drop a chandelier on him. Phantom!
It's Phantom of the Opera is actually based
This
on...
is a Phantom of the Opera retelling, actually.
In their universe, Phantom of the Opera is the Odyssey. And that's why...
In dreams he came. Oh my god.
And Grover's in a wedding dress. Wait. Right, so they escape from Polyphemus with the fleece and are immediately confronted by Luke.
And Luke's got a crossbow.
Luke's got a crossbow.
Annabeth had a crossbow in the first movie.
Do we even know what weapon she's using this time? I don't remember seeing her use one.
She doesn't have any weapons.
She probably used one in the final fight scene, and I'm just forgetting
I don't think she was in... we don't really see her fight in that one.
We only see her run up and yell, "Go Percy," and then get killed.
As women should. Anyway.
Right. In a way. Never mind. I was gonna say, stabbed through the stomach back like Charybdis.
Oh my god.
But that doesn't totally work because Clarice and her are together at that point.
Yeah.
Anyway, Luke appears and then tries to kill Percy with the crossbow.
Tyson takes the crossbow bolt, and when you look at this crossbow, okay, it's an automatic crossbow, right? He's got a bunch of bolts in there. It doesn't take long to, he could just shoot again. But instead what happens, it's like capture the flag rules, right? This is how we've all been trained in combat. You get off one good shot, and then you wait and see what happens afterwards. And you let everyone else regroup. And then you go again.
Yes.
Even when you have the high ground and artillery. Maybe this is how battle tactics have developed post in a world without the Bronze Age collapse.
Of course.
I really hope this bit continues to be funny. Okay. Tyson says to Percy, "You do it for me," and then falls in a ravine. To which I say, I don't think Percy would do it for him at this point in the story. But I think there's a dramatic irony to it.
Yeah. I'm considering.
And then he falls in this ravine and everyone's like, "Oh my god, he's dead." And then Luke's just like, "Wow, Percy, can't believe you killed Tyson, died because of you."
Can't believe you would do such a thing, Percy.
He literally says, "This one's on you." Again, not firing again. Just standing there taunting.
Right. And they're all taken prisoner, tied up, so that they can watch Luke bring Kronos back.
And Percy's like, "Wow, I destroyed Olympus because I
didn't prevent this."
You know what? Luke's right. That's on him. It's all Percy Jackson's fault, whatever happens in this world, if he doesn't prevent it.
We didn't bring up the fact that Luke was playing chess against himself.
Oh my god. And he said the pawn thing, too.
And he said the pawn line, and we totally forgot to bring it up.
This is what I'm saying. This is all building up to the reveal that Luke is the only person. It's him fighting himself in this prophecy. Mm-hmm. Olympus to preserve her rays is entirely... This is Luke's story, actually. This is Luke's story as told by Percy Jackson. Actually, this does make a lot of sense. And then he said all this stuff to me about how my dad doesn't talk to me. And even though my entire internal conflict this entire movie has been the fact that my dad's not talking to me, I was like, no hesitation.
Well, it's because Percy doesn't want to admit that was even a thought in his head. He's telling the story, he's rewriting his own role in it. And claiming... Really, the only doubts I had was whether I was good enough or not.
Yeah, it was just imposter syndrome. Oh, I had another thought. I have some prophecy thoughts, actually. I did want to flag one thing before we get into it, though, which is all of Luke's followers look like they're at least in their late 20s, which I found fascinating. I was like, oh man, so these are the older demigods that are really fed up. I guess they've never stopped being attacked by monsters. Can you imagine being 27 and some 16-year-old punk is trying to stop you from your revolution? Can you imagine you and us, a group of us, we have to fight? Actually, it's Twitter, what I'm describing.
The addition of this 20-something-year-old girl to Luke's story in the TV show. It's about to be even funnier.
I forgot about that. Oh, that's going to be so good. My favorite part in this movie is when Percy runs up to Luke to try to stop the rise of Kronos. First of all, Percy and Luke do not sword fight.
They like wrestle.
My second favorite part is that Tyson appears. They get a moment. They like hug it out. They're like, oh my god, I can't believe you're not dead. This hug is what ensures Kronos.
I know.
Like, neither of them go, maybe we should take the fleece off the coffin that's right there. No, we're gonna hug. And then I thought about it and I was like, is this what they mean? The lightning thief and the son of the sea grappling with the fleece? And ensuring Kronos' rise? Maybe this was the prophecy.
That's what I'm thinking. Like, this is why I think that Tyson counts in this movie, because it keeps reaffirming that, like, he's just like all of them. He's basically a half-blood. And then we have this, two cousins grapple for the fleece. Tyson is the one who, like, actually beats Luke in the fight. It's the son of the sea god and the lightning thief. That's Tyson. So that part of the prophecy is about Tyson in my mind.
I think you're right, 100%.
The great prophecy, it depends on, like, whether the movie believes that Tyson is a half-blood. In my mind, Tyson, in the world of this movie, is a contender, just because of the way that it's been treating the word half-blood, or, like, even treating the word, like you said, like, demi-titan versus demigod, and that, like, it's all about which camp you sort of identify with. Tyson is a half-blood, and he and Percy, like you said, brought Kronos back.
Their hug ensured his rise.
Through a hug, yeah. So really, I think if you put the sword in Tyson's hands, the prophecy still can play out. I think this is the wild card that comes in, like, movie 5 in the universe, where these movies continue being made. They've kind of eliminated the possibility of using the original twist on the prophecy. And so Tyson being involved, they keep writing him off, but he is essential.
Anyway, Kronos rises as a weird demon devil. And I checked the timestamp. He comes back when there's 20 minutes left in this movie, Phoebe. We're, like, well into Act 3.
And, like, they could have used it...
They could have.
The way that Battle of the Labyrinth does, where it's like, he's back. Uh-oh. What'll happen in the next one?
Yeah, because they still ended on a cliffhanger. Unless it wasn't a cliffhanger. And unless we're supposed to gather that Thalia is actually the hero of the prophecy, and then just assume that she defeats him, and that's the actual ending.
Yeah. No, we didn't actually... That's what's implied.
I remember, like, it literally wasn't until the moment it starts happening, too, where I was like, nah, there's no way. There's no way.
You watch this scene and figure they're gonna stop it. I know when I watched it the first time, I thought when I realized that Kronos was coming back, that he was going to possess Luke in that moment, too.
Oh, yeah. I feel like I must have had the same thought.
And then he starts forming, and you're like...
That's the devil. What I did not appreciate at the time this movie first came out was the fact that Luke goes up to him and he just goes, my favorite, and eats him.
It eats him.
Like, I definitely, the first time I saw this movie, I probably thought to myself, garbage. But, like, rewatching it now, I'm like, that's actually good.
Yeah, it's great. It's the best part of the scene.
Like, if you're gonna go this route, yeah, that's what you should do. Go for it. Just go all the way.
It's really just making everything extremely explicit. You know, we start out talking about Kronos eating his own children. We've got Polyphemus trying to eat them, and he says that he had to eat his own flock to survive.
Oh my god,
Kronos ate his own kids.
You're right. There's a theme.
There is a theme here.
And they all get eaten by Charybdis. Well, I was thinking as well, because Grover also gets eaten. And I was like, why does Grover also get eaten? It's to fulfill the fact that every satyr who has gone for the fleece gets eaten. We're coming full circle. There's actually, like, shockingly good full circle moments. We open on Grover, Luke, Annabeth, and then Thalia sacrificing herself to certain death at the hands of a Cyclops to let them get to safety. And then there's a new crew of 4, well, and Clarice, but she doesn't really count in this. And Percy watches as one by one Grover, Annabeth, and Tyson all die and then come back. And then Luke's ending, the fact that his ending is to die, presumed dead at the hands of a Cyclops in a full circle moment, like for Thalia. There's a lot of stuff coming back around.
And it's all foreshadowing. Like, seeing all of this, you should know, oh, Thalia's coming back. Mm-hmm. If you're really paying attention.
Although also is this evidence that prophecies do work the same way in the books, where you have to be 3. First, we knock off Tyson. Okay, he comes back. Okay, we're gonna knock off Grover, and then he comes back. Okay, we're gonna knock off Annabeth, and then she comes back.
Oh, like it keeps trying to knock them down to 3 and failing. And maybe that's also part of why Clarice's quest was failing so badly. It was because she didn't go on it with 3 people. Right, so...
Percy reclaims his own destiny by doing exactly what the prophecy tells him to do.
It's crazy to stand there and do exactly what the prophecy says while saying that he's gonna make his own destiny.
I'm gonna make my own destiny.
by killing the evil one with the cursed blade.
But we get a nice transition of Clarice getting to bring the fleece back and literally getting her laurels. Well, and then Percy and Chiron have a whole conversation where Percy's sort of like... His arc is hard to track here, because he starts off the story being like, oh man, I'm not a hero anymore. And then he gets a prophecy that makes him a hero. And then he's immediately like, I don't want a prophecy. Oh, it's scary. And then at some point in the ending, he's like, prophecy, what does that even mean? Make your own destiny. And then Chiron comes up to him and is like, all right, you know, the prophecy is probably not even about you. It might not be about you. Who knows? Like, who knows? And Percy's like, no, it's about me. I want this now.
Right, he's choosing it.
Because he's over that making your own destiny stuff. So I guess the end of that arc is, meh.
The end of that arc is... I mean, this isn't totally working with the whole choosing your destiny thing. But... after spending all this time with no contact from his father, does he maybe find some comfort in a prophecy that he can fall back on that will support him? You know, there's a little bit of direction in his life instead of feeling aimless.
No, okay, that works. That works for me. Yeah, like the prophecy's taking the place of, like, the guidance his father once gave him.
Yeah, like instead of a voice in his head coming from his father, it's now the lines of a prophecy that he can lean back on.
In a way, it's his arc is him reclaiming what makes him feel special.
Really, I think this is proving that Percy in these movies really isn't all that special. He's kind of right about himself, because the only ways in which he becomes the hero is either by listening to his father's words or listening to the Oracle's words. He really needs that guidance to become a hero in these movies. On his own, he's kind of in the way that Clarice and Annabeth and Scylla and Charybdis are lost without each other.
Divorced from the other side of themselves.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, we can also make that about, like... We talked about this in The Sea of Monsters. We talked about, like, Percy and Clarice, and we talked about doubles. Mm-hmm. So, like, that story is also here with, like, Percy and Tyson as 2 sons of Poseidon, dealing with what it means to be a son of Poseidon, 2 different versions of what it means to be a son of Poseidon. Percy and Luke as 2 parts of each other. There's a lot of that happening in this movie.
Just like how this movie shows us that there are 2 sides of reality. Mm-hmm. One in which the Bronze Age collapse happened, and one in which it didn't.
Yes. And one in which reality happened, and one in which Percy is trying to recount a story.
Yeah. And the ending, again, we have our ambiguity as well. We are free to choose.
Right. I'm curious, what would Percy's relationship to Thalia be if he does find comfort in the prophecy, when there's someone who shows up and tries to take it from him? If only they'd made the 3rd movie.
I know. I'm on the edge of my seat wondering.
So, what bead would we give this movie?
I'm gonna go with the teleportation amulet, because this movie teleports me to an alternate reality.
Mm-hmm. My bead is going to look like the stained glass. It's going to be... I think my favorite shot of the stained glass is the shadow of, like, the hero. That's clearly Percy. But maybe not. Against the waterfall. I've always really liked that one moment. You know, in a way, the Chronos like the way that Kronos looks, he almost looks like the stained glass coming together. You know, it's like he's made of pieces of stained glass.
Mm-hmm.
And he's the devil.
Mm.
Christianity. Thank you all for listening to Monster Donut. Next time, we're doing the Lightning Thief musical, along with a special guest. Until then, man, my brain is asleep.
It's dead. It's dead. There's something about this movie that murders your thoughts. I swear. Maybe it's...
dream magic.
It's something. I don't know. Oh my god.
Until then, if you would like to find us on social media, you can find us at PJOpod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, where you can also find our link tree, which has links to our merch shop, as well as our Patreon. And it also has a link to our email if you'd like to shoot us an email before our Rowanverse. We keep calling it the Rowanverse wrap-up. It's not. It's the Camp Half-Blood Chronicles wrap-up.
Yeah. It's just all the Greek and Roman,
Yeah.
all that stuff.
But you can shoot us an email there or comment on Spotify, which I think it's updated, and now I can actually reply to comments, which is cool if I can figure it out. On our Patreon, if you enjoyed listening to us talk about this movie, you can also watch us watch it. We filmed our reactions to it. It will be up on Patreon, hopefully by the time this episode goes up. Speaking of which, thank you to our patrons. Latino Kaya, Patty VCK, Bethany from Public Works, Sydney Fox, Joke, Reina Avila Ramirez Ariano, Charlie McNeil, Bronte Lebo, Ethan Not Nakamura, The Damn Meme Page, Kels, Mason Bowman, Casey Cassidy, Busy Cat, Natalia Sanchez, Melissa Rounds, Oat Milk, Alana, Elena, Melanie Valdez, Pamela Ion, The Kid on Her Own, Grace Hunker, Kaylee, Mana Monshin, Amy Shu, and Calamity. Thank you all very much. We appreciate you a lot.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.